Hi, I'm Catherine Simpson, and I am doing my presentation on the Kawabata article, Virtuoso Codes of Violin Performance, about power, military heroism, and gender. The author, Michael Kawabata, is a professor at Stony Brook University in Stony Brook, New York. She is a musicologist and a professional violinist, on top of teaching undergraduate courses on theory and history of 19th century music, along with postgraduate courses on musicology. Her article is studying the historical culture contributed to the cliché of violin virtuosos as heroic, and it's both physical and musical gestures that contribute to the impression of violin virtuosi as heroes and their performances as symbols of the military power. Military heroic codes that permeated music at that time, and the public images of violinists as military heroes, their performance gestures, and symbolism of the violin instrument itself all contributed to that rise of virtuosity at the time. Heroic codes included things of diabolism, vocality, exoticism, and gender codes that all were encompassed within those. The Age of Revolution in the European culture contributed to this in the French Revolution, the Napoleonic Wars, gender codes, and the general virtuosic methods in many of the cultural aspects, not just in music at the time. Virtuosity was viewed as power, and therefore during that revolutionary time it was meaningful to society. In musical codes, the military topics dominated the multiple genres of music, not just violin performances. It was easily recognizable and very popular during that time because of what was going on in historical times, that the revolution, and that sparked the popularity of military bands and those themes. Heroic codes were usually within the first movement, although they were sometimes found in the final movements of pieces as well. Trumpets and drums were a lot of the instrumentation that were involved in those violin concertos as well that represented the military sound. The Polonaise movements also were very accommodating to the military type styles of the time. Second movements served as the lyrical contrast within the pieces of music, and those represented different cultural aspects of the time, other than the military styles. The vocality, femininity of those would often get swapped out in different performances at the time. It was kind of like they were viewed as their own works. Violinists exemplified those heroic codes in certain ways over other musicians. Although there were multiple different musicians that could show virtuosic ways, violinists took the military themes and made them virtuosic through using the different registers and adding ornamentation. By changing those themes, the violinists demonstrated themselves as individuals and able to hold their own against the forces of the orchestra, similar to a general to his army. The violinist seemed heroic when one soloist was going against that entire orchestra, kind of creating that David and Goliath feel, and creating that drama of inequality within the violin concerto that showed a lot of heroism in the aspect of the audience. Arrival points, especially at the end of cadenzas and things, occurred throughout the pieces, sound like a hero's welcome when the soloist meets up with the orchestra again. We already talked about in the historical context, it was the Age of Revolution, so there was governmental changes from monarchies to states and republics happening in both the Americas and in Europe, along with, I think there was one going on in Greece, and there was a Haitian revolution also that went on around this time. So lots of revolution. In the French Revolution, Napoleon led several successful campaigns during that war, and he became the emperor in 1804 and remained that way through 1815. During that time, the French concerto flourished and continued to flourish after he died even, because he was seen as the promoter of French revolutionary ideals. The heroic violinist that was connected with those concertos was then connected with politics, because Napoleon was known for so many military and political victories, and he was the one who won many battles that led to the French building a large empire at the time. The military style of music itself changed from those of 1775 to all those concertos that were written after 1789. The march topic of quick duple meter and dotted rhythms was established back in the classical style and carried that aristocracy feel. But then when the bourgeois level was gaining some individual freedom and feeling empowered, after the French Revolution, the French concerto military style demonstrated more of that individual military leadership and heroism, and it changed the meaning of military as well. There are multiple violin virtuosi at the time, which are all listed in your handout if you wish to look through those. Originally, heroes and hero worship were connected to the figures of Greek mythology. But then during the French Revolution, Napoleon was made to be a military, almost like a military god, that was heroic in his risks and created that ideal hero look. Those heroism ideas then were placed onto violinists, and they were compared with military leaders. For example, Paganini was compared to Napoleon in his demonic qualities of how he played that set them apart from other men. Soloists in violin concertos took the place of the modern conductor, and orchestras had to look to the violinist's bow for cues, similar to an army looking up to a general. The military image came from that bow then, when they were leading their army on. And also, because the bow of the violin became a symbol of a sharp weapon. It resembled a sword in the imagination of audience members, and the sword was connected to that newly empowered bourgeois individual, which also made the violin more of an instrument of power to individuals. The design of the violin bow changed also during this time, as well as how the violin was held. When they changed the design of the violin, it helped for hooked bowing, which allowed for more of the articulation and those dotted rhythms that are associated with military style. And also, the holding of the violin went from being on the lower arm to being held up in the style that we are used to today underneath the chin, which frees the left hand and makes it so it is easier for the musician to play. The last topic of this article was very, very interesting to me. We talked about the gender codes and how the violin was associated with certain genders. The voice of the violin is described as feminine, probably because it's up in those upper registers and is connected with sopranos and their flowing melodic lines. The violin was newly symbolized as a feminine instrument during this time because it was originally the king of instruments, which made it masculine. But then why it was changed is not really known, but I suppose because of the shape, because it's got the curvy shape, and also because of the soprano range it has. The bow is still considered to be masculine though, because it's kind of made as a phallic symbol during this time. The heroic codes of this time in the music were also considered masculine because military heroism and power were dominated by males. The violinists also used the bow in an aggressive manner, and that seemed to enact sexual domination. Women violinists were placed under a lot of discussion and under different performance assumptions due to the fact that this instrument was still associated with a lot of male tendencies. The women were only seen as successful musicians when imitating masculine displays of performance. Then they were viewed as homosexual because women are handling a symbolic feminine instrument and a phallic object in the bow, which was considered taboo in society and very inappropriate for women. In performance, the physical demands of playing the instrument were considered abhorrent by audiences who viewed female violinists. Women seemed to have to earn their public acclaim by acting male, basically, in their performances. It was really unfortunate, and I think, unfortunately, that's something that happens today, sometimes, still. But that's one of our discussion questions. That's actually the second one. Kawabata mentions on page 104 that perhaps violin performance offered a 19th century approximation of a modern spectacle, the heavy metal rocker smashing up his guitar in a testosterone-induced display. Do you agree with this thought? Is society still prone to connect certain instruments, performance styles, and music with masculinity, or have we moved forward from these 19th century concepts enough to give performers of both genders equal expectations in both musical content and performance style? The other discussion question that I have is, in our discussions on topic theory, we have evaluated the progression of militia styles and how they relate to the culture of the times. Do you believe that the popularity of military topoi would have progressed in this manner without the historical and cultural influences? Would virtuosic music have evolved in the same fashion with similar audience reaction? I will be interested to see what your answers to this discussion is for this week. Thank you, and I look forward to your discussions.